we don't want to have anxiety. We don't want to have these symptoms. We most certainly don't want to have a panic attack. So it's not about, saying, oh, this is awesome, bring it on. It's about a willingness to accept that, hey, this is happening at the moment, noticing it, naming it. That's a really good place to start. I'm feeling anxious.
Welcome to the ADHD Families Podcast. I'm your host, Sharon Collin, an award-winning credentialed ADHD coach and consultant and mama and wife to a very ADHD family. I am seriously obsessed with making life easier for people with ADHD and those that support them. My business, The Functional Family, provides life-changing support and strategies for ADHD. I particularly love anything that saves time, decreases conflict, and creates space for fun. Do you want a life with your beautiful family that is more functional, fun, and full of joy? Let's explore together the wonderful and sometimes wacky world of family life with ADHD in the mix. Welcome to another episode of the ADHD Families Podcast. I'm your host, Sharon Collin, and I'm so happy that you are here. Today, we have the incredible Dr. Jodi Richardson. She's going to be helping us with anxiety. Now, we know that when there's ADHD present, there is often a huge base note of anxiety that comes in. The ADHD brain is often a fast, anxious brains. I thought I would get in the incredible Dr. Jodi Richardson to help us with supporting our beautiful family members that have anxiety. Now, she is an educational leader. She supports parents and teachers to change their relationship with anxiety and dial it right down and light the way for their children and students to do the same. She's a professional speaker. She supports whole school communities all around Australia and the best-selling author of a book called Anxious Kids and Anxious Mums. She is also the host of a very popular podcast called Well, Hello, Anxiety. And she is a mum of two and an all-round beautiful human. I can't wait for you to hear what she has to say about supporting our gorgeous family members with anxiety. Let's get to it. Welcome, Jodi. I am so excited to have you on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me, Sharon. It's so nice to be on the other side of the table, so to speak, or the microphone.
I love any chat that we have together. You are such a beautiful human, and I'm very happy to be sharing the amazing work that you do. So tell us all a little bit about you and why you do what you do.
At the heart of the work that I do is a little kid that struggled for so long with anxiety that nobody understood, and then an adult that thought she was broken. Something's really wrong. I don't know why. I don't know what. And I don't think anyone else would ever understand. And so, it dates back to when I was in primary school. I had my first feelings of anxiety, and really, thankfully, my mum kept sending me to school because it was classic. I feel sick, I don't want to go. My brain could recognize that something about school didn't feel psychologically safe. I loved my teachers, but they were also yelling a lot. There was 53 of us in a prep class, a big double class, and it was very stressful for them. I can only imagine. But it was stressful for me, and my system wasn't used to it. And so that was kind of the start of it all. And fast forward kind of 20 years, having experienced anxiety as a disorder for a long time, but without any kind of diagnosis, no recognition that anything I was thinking or feeling was outside of the norm according to kind of me or my parents or my GPs. I experienced major depressive disorder because I guess eventually my brain and body went, well, you're not going to do anything about it. We're going to give you a break, because my system had just been in chronic fight or flight for most of my life. And so that was the time I went to get help, because I could see quite clearly that something was terribly wrong, not realizing that what I'd been living with was very treatable and well understood by that stage. And so that was kind of my journey to getting help. And ever the teacher, I started off as a teacher and have done a whole lot of learning since then. I guess I really just feel as though, well, this is really important, and I needed this when I was a kid. I needed this for my parents, for my teachers. And so that's why I do the work that I do, to try to make sure that the knowledge is available in a way that's shared compassionately and clearly, and that people know there's lots you can do. And I also like to share what they can do as well.
What a beautiful answer. So tell me a little bit about anxiety. So we know that ADHD and anxiety, they often go hand in hand, right? You know, the ADHD brain is often a very anxious brain. Can you talk to the symptoms of anxiety for those listening at home?
Yes, and when it comes to ADHD, it's so good that we're having this conversation, and to know that kids with ADHD are 3 times more likely to have an anxiety disorder that goes hand in hand with that. And it makes sense when we think about it, when we think about the fact that anxiety is essentially what triggers the stress response. And it does that because a threat has been detected. And so for a young person who's really struggling to get organized, to finish work, to learn in class because of the way their brain functions, it's stressful. The idea that what's going to be asked of me, I'm going to have to explain myself. I haven't done what I needed to do. I haven't brought what I needed to bring. And so that anticipation of what is coming next is anxiety. It's the anticipation of a threat, even though it's meant to keep us safe from life-threatening dangers. The threats that the brain is sort of looking for are threats to safety, but it can't differentiate between nearly getting hit by a car on the way to school and knowing a teacher is going to have an expectation that might be beyond what you can produce. And so it shows in lots of ways. And I like to break it down into 4 key areas. So parents listening can think, okay, yep, I can see how anxiety is showing under these kind of 4 umbrellas, if you like. And so we most certainly have thinking, and with that can come a lot of worry and a lot of what if. What if this happens? What if I don't do that? What if I do that? And often that worst case scenario thinking, that sort of, everything's going to be a disaster kind of thinking. Also, when it comes to thinking, it's about concentration, because the spotlight of our attention when we're anxious is on the threat. So it's really hard to take in other information and to focus and pay attention to what's being asked of you or what you're trying to learn. The next umbrella, I suppose, is the physical symptoms. And so because the brain's alarm has been activated, threats detected, we go into fight or flight. And with that comes a whole host of physical changes. And so often when you ask someone about their anxiety, they'll talk about how their body feels. And it's really important for parents listening to help your kids understand how it shows in their body, because when we can see those telltale early signs of anxiety in the way we feel physically, it's a window into what's coming, and we can do something about it. The sooner the better, of course, to start to dampen that response back down. And so classic symptoms would be racing heart, changes to breathing. Now, I'm about to actually take a big deep breath, because I still live with anxiety, and because I care so much about this, I feel a little bit anxious when I'm doing a podcast recording. And actually, that's something to remember too, that it shows up around what we care about. So our breathing can become short and shallow. And that means you can hear what I just did, like a big deep breath or a sigh, or a child might say, I can't get a full breath. I can't get all the air I need. It's this weird kind of feeling of unease. And of course, there's trembling and tingling and perspiration and upset tummy and various other symptoms that can come hand in hand with the anxiety. The third umbrella relates to the emotional side of anxiety, because the part of the brain that is kind of dealing with this threat is also responsible for our emotions. So I was in a school the other day talking to year 12s, and I shared an example, just trying to get the kids to talk about different feelings in different circumstances. And I said, you didn't get the result that you wanted when you auditioned for something, or you're trying out for a team, or the reality didn't meet the expectations, and a kid said angry was a word. And I was really glad he said that, because, I mean, that can certainly be something that comes with anxiety. That's another big emotion that kids often don't know what to do with. And a lot of tears can be a sign of anxiety as well, very, very teary. And the fourth umbrella relates to actions or behaviours. I say behaviours not meaning poor behaviour. I just mean, what do you observe as a parent? What do you see happening? Are they finding it hard to sit still? Are they retreating? Are they withdrawing? Are they interrupting? Are they, behaving or acting in a way that is kind of indicative of something happening beneath the surface? And hand in hand with anxiety goes avoidance. So that's something to look out for as well.
Thank you so much for explaining that. That really clarifies, what people are looking for, and allows us to have compassion for some of those things when we see them as well. I want to ask a question about a panic attack, because, obviously we've all heard about it. But often people say, I'm having a panic attack. Can you describe to us what that is?
I can, because I've experienced that. I don't know, have you, Sharon, ever experienced a panic attack yourself?
I have.
Yeah.
Thankfully, not often, but
Not
it's
often.
pretty terrifying.
It's so terrifying. You feel as though this is it. My time has come. My number is up. It's that real feeling that of dread. And what happens with a panic attack? I guess if I just wind it back, because it is a spiral, we feel anxious, and that anxiety that we feel is intolerable. The feeling in the body, the dread comes, the worries, the worst case scenario thinking. And then we start to become very anxious about what we're experiencing. So it's often termed anxiety about anxiety. And so you're starting to have the feelings in your chest, like the tightness in your chest, because our muscles become quite tense. And then you can think, oh my gosh, I'm having a heart attack. And then you become more anxious about that. And so it can be quite a spiral. And that anxiety just drives more of these physical sensations, and the dread, the worry. But what we know about panic attacks is they do resolve on their own. They don't last forever. And there are steps that we can take when we understand what's happening with a panic attack. If we can take those steps sort of earlier in the piece, then we are in a better position to be able to do something to sort of stop it from escalating beyond where it's already got to. It's not a lot of fun. And for some people, there's a huge amount of anxiety about a panic attack occurring in public. And so it can then kind of morph into social restraint and social avoidance, and more avoidance, because the idea of having a panic attack in front of other people is more terrifying than having it alone at home. So, yeah, it's really, really tough, really tough.
And for our beautiful listeners that have kids with ADHD, or perhaps you have ADHD yourself, the nature of ADHD is a dysregulated nervous system, right? Which I often say that people with ADHD are sensitive to the world. They are threat detectors. That's what they were built for. They were supposed to be at the front of the tribe and spotting all the threats. And so their nervous system is very up and down all the time. So they're much more likely to have anxiety because they are on hyper alert all the time. So for someone like that, if they could feel themselves, spiraling into a panic attack, what are some of those steps that they could take to try and diffuse it a little bit?
One of the things that can make a really powerful difference is acceptance, but it's often not a popular answer because often people conflate acceptance with kind of an approval or a wanting, not a willing. And so we don't want to have anxiety. We don't want to have these symptoms. We most certainly don't want to have a panic attack. So it's not about, saying, oh, this is awesome, bring it on. It's about a willingness to accept that, hey, this is happening at the moment, noticing it, naming it. That's a really good place to start. I'm feeling anxious. And for myself, when I feel anxious, I'll say to myself, I'm feeling anxious, and that's okay. Makes sense. I'm doing something important. I did a pre-record for the radio station just this morning, and it's important. I know that's going to air to hundreds of thousands of people. It makes sense that I felt anxious about that, and often it does. So I think this noticing and naming, name it to tame it, as no doubt you've mentioned on the podcast before, this idea that when we can accurately name how we're feeling, we can reduce the distress. And noticing and being curious about where you're feeling it in your body. And with that recognition that you're feeling that way, we can put something into practice to help kind of almost put the brakes on that fight or flight response rather than placing our foot to the floor and accelerating it. So we can dampen it. We can dampen it if we can see and understand and recognize what's happening.
I love that. So much in, the emotional regulation techniques that we support our kids with is all about the power of the pause, like being able to pause before we act, or not act in like a red zone kind of situation. We're acting when we're from a place of allowing ourselves to regulate first before we act. And so much of what you said there just rang true to that. Like if we're stopping to name it and tame it, we are really just checking in with ourselves and giving ourselves that little pause to acknowledge how we're feeling in that moment.
It's so important. I love that, the power of the pause. And I really agree. And I think one of the things that helps all of us, I'm a parent, I've got 2 teenagers, and I'm a human, so this applies to me as well, is that it's permission as well to feel whatever comes up. And knowing that it's whatever feeling comes up, even though sometimes as parents we can look at what's happening for our kids and it might not make sense to us. We might go, oh, I don't understand. I don't understand why you're feeling this way. But the most important thing is that whatever a person feels is their truth. And in that pause, if there can be a moment to acknowledge what the feeling is, a validation by the parent, and some permission to feel it, it's incredibly powerful when we just say to ourselves, I'm feeling like this, and that's okay. Some mornings I wake up, most mornings I wake up and I feel the same way I do feel now. I feel optimistic and hopeful and good. But some mornings I wake up and I feel sad. I might not know why. I feel flat. I just feel this weight kind of on me that I can't explain. And I'll just say to myself, oh, well, I'm just going to have to feel a bit crap, or SHIT, or, this is in my head. I'm just going to have to feel like this for a little while, or not even have to. This is just how I feel. I'm going to feel like this for a little while. And I notice it and I just accept that that's how it is and move on, still doing the things that I need to do. And inevitably, I'll check in with myself an hour or so later and I'm like, oh, that's passed. And so I think if we can get our kids to learn that feelings come, feelings go, and the more we make room for them, they get comfy quicker and they leave quicker.
I love that so much. My eldest son was talking about anxiety to me one night, and he was saying, I just had this racing thought, just keeps coming back and like looping, looping thoughts. And we were discussing it, and we were saying that thoughts are like clouds, right? They pass. And we don't have to reach up and touch every single one of them. You can let them go, and another thought will come along, and it's okay to just watch them, to just be the observer. Like, you are not all your thoughts. Like, you are, you can just let them glide by, which he loved. He liked that analogy to know that it's okay to just watch them. You don't have to be a part of every single one of them.
Yes, that stepping back, that idea of being the observer is incredibly powerful. And another great metaphor, I love metaphors when it comes to thoughts, and what you've just shared is beautiful. And an extension of that is that kids can sort of almost, imagine themselves sort of placing a thought on a cloud. Another sort of similar metaphor is about traffic, that we can let our thoughts go by like traffic, but every now and again we'll hop in a car. and we'll find ourselves down the road. And then we can go, oops, I got in. And now it's time to get out, come back to where I started, and to help our kids kind of recognize that it's a very normal part of our thinking as well. And I love that you've raised this because it takes away this idea of control, this idea that we can control what we think and that we have this kind of power over our thoughts. But I think most of us know the more we try to not think of something, the more it's generated. And the research absolutely shows this. I think it's called the white bear experiment. And so being that observer and almost sort of zooming out, and there's a really good prefix that I've taught my kids to use. It's so funny, and no doubt Sharon and anyone else that's learning, we're empowering our kids how the best way we can when they're open and willing to listen. And this idea that I teach my kids to notice and to say to themselves, I notice I'm having the thought that, and then insert the thought. And often I'll also say, and this is not just what I do at home, this is research backed, these are research backed strategies to sort of take the sting and the power out of thoughts, is to ask the question, is it helpful? I'll share an example. So our daughter's just recently, actually just yesterday at the time of recording, tried out for the school volleyball team. And we haven't discussed this, but I can imagine, I mean, she really, really wants to get in. So we don't know yet if she's made the team. But no doubt, naturally, she'll be having thoughts of, what if I don't? What if I don't get picked? And it's a very natural way to think. If that was really looping for her and she shared that with me, I'd say, all right, well, let's just understand it's natural. You care about this. So, this is important. And so the question is, what if I don't get picked? So we could say, I notice I'm having the thought, or I notice I'm always or repeatedly having the thought, what if I don't get picked? And we'd sort of sit with that, and then I'd say, right, well, let's just ask the next question, is it helpful? And the answer to that is no, because it's out of their control. 3 weeks ago, the answer would have been, well, it's not a helpful question, but is there something that we can do to have some control over this situation? The answer would have been yes. And in fact, 3 weeks ago, we bought a volleyball and put up kind of a makeshift net, and we've been doing lots of practice. And so I think it speaks to this idea that we can spend a lot of time trying to think about and change something that is outside of our control. And a lot of what we think sort of falls into that category. So when a thought comes up, if it's repetitive, asking the question, is it helpful, after having got a little bit of distance from it, using that prefix can be really, really helpful. But it takes a lot of practice.
I love that. I'm totally using that. I wanted to ask about how, we know that there's a lot of beautiful mums listening to this. I always ask a question that relates to women, because I know that's our demographic that listens to this podcast a lot. There's some beautiful dads out there as well. But we know that women have typically been dismissed with anxiety. So like we might have had the aunt that had anxiety and, she's just a bit of a worrier. And the doctor, you've just got a bit of anxiety, and they're, perhaps their feelings have been dismissed. Do you notice that there has been a shift in people's perception of anxiety?
When you say that, I think of the old hysterical comments that, yeah, I know, which, yes, it's come a long way. It's come a long way. I really applaud organisations like Beyond Blue, who sort of were founded or started in the year 2000, so quite a long time ago now, 24 years ago. And I worked for Beyond Blue back in 2001, 2002. It's come a long way. I think that we can normalise it by having these conversations and by recognising that it's a very normal part of being human. We have brains whose primary job is to keep us alive. And like you say, the vigilant ones, the ones with the vigilant brains were the ones that were on lookout for threats, and they're the ones that survived and procreated and had offspring who had vigilant brains. And so in terms of kind of mental health literacy and respect for what women experience and men as well. And I think there's so many beautiful organisations who are really working hard to speak to the men, of the population about their own needs. And so in some ways as women, because we're more inclined to talk about how we feel, and that's been more socially acceptable, over the years, in many ways we're ahead from the point of view that talking about it is a very first step to being able to get the right help and be supported. Whereas a lot of men generationally are very stoic, very much boys don't cry, suck it up, rub some dirt on it, get on with it. So I think equally, the more that we can understand exactly what's happening with an anxious brain, and also understand that, as a population, we are more susceptible. Women are more likely, we are twice as likely to experience anxiety. So there are some very clear statistics around who is more likely to struggle. But I really do think that we've come a long way in terms of understanding that things about women, like our hormones, like our coping styles, like our mental load, classic double shift. For a long time, women were in the home. And then women decided we want to work too, and now we get to do both. And so there's so much to unpack, but I do think things are going in a brilliant direction, and the funding and focus is certainly all pointing towards more help, more understanding, more education and more research. So we're in a good place, but doesn't mean there's less suffering at the moment. And that's, there's a long way to go with that.
I was chatting to my GP about anxiety at some stage, and we were talking about what people get anxious over, because he knows what I do for a living, and we're talking about anxiety, and I was saying, but I've got legitimate things to worry about. Like I've got, kids that run out in front of cars and school refusal and like all this stuff that's legitimate, right? Like I was like basically saying like my problems are bigger than normal, right? Because that's what it feels like to me. But he said, no, it's not about that. It's about like the little old lady that lives at the street can have anxiety about going to her letterbox, right? It is the same. There's no measure, right? It's the same. Anxiety is anxiety. And I thought that was very profound. And I was like, oh, actually, it's not a competition, right? it's not a competition. You can be just as anxious about something that someone else finds easy. It doesn't necessarily make sense in terms of what you're worried about. Do you find that as well?
I do. And I was chatting to Mum this week, and Mum lives with an anxiety disorder, and she doesn't mind me chatting about her experience, and it's really hard for her to make a phone call. It is incredibly hard if, nobody likes calling Telstra, but if you've got to make a phone call that is to organise a tradesperson to come or to solve a problem or to ask a question, that can take days, weeks, sometimes for her to be in the right frame of mind. And inevitably you make it and you realise, oh, wish I'd done it weeks ago. And so for some people, picking up the phone and making a call is, and I'm sure there are listeners who are going, yep, that's me. And others, like you say, and I guess this is the thing. This is what it comes down to. The alarm in our brain is triggered in exactly the same way, whether the threat is real, for example, child running in front of car, or whether or not it is imagined. Last night I was in bed and I was thinking about something to do with work, and my anxiety response was triggered, just literally imagining something, or whether or not it's perceived. And I think you've asked such a good question in this, and it took me a moment to kind of clue into exactly the best way to answer it. But whether it is real, imagined, or perceived, the response is the same. And so, yes, I understand where you're coming from, because it's like the anxiety that you experience when you've got a child who's not going to school is a very genuine threat to learning, and not just safety so much, but, it's a genuine threat to their development. And whereas going to the letterbox is not a threat to safety, but the brain reacts in the same way. Just depends on the brain. It's quite fascinating, really, but it's a bit of an all or nothing response, unfortunately.
So that's super interesting. And it makes me, because sometimes when I get overwhelmed, I'm like, I'm going to move to the country. I'm going to move to the Byron Bay hinterlands. I'm going to just live a quiet life. I'm going to bake bread. But see,
sourdough.
That's like always my plan B if things don't work out. But I feel like I would still find something to be anxious about in the Byron Bay hinterlands baking my sourdough, right? So what I wanted to do with that, and why I think what your work is so important, is because it's about having strategies to cope with the brain that we've got, right? But rather than having an exit plan.
Yes. Exactly. Yes. That exit plan sounds very nice. Maybe a lovely holiday. But you're right. It's really important. And one of the things that's incredibly empowering is when a child understands the way their brain works. And you do such incredible work to really empower parents to be confident in their knowledge and to understand themselves. And just we all operate differently. We are all unique in the way that there's so much of us, so much of the way we operate is the same, but every single individual is unique. When we understand ourselves, and I think that's what empowers us more as women as we get older. We understand ourselves. We're very firm in our understanding of who we are, what we need, what we like, what we don't, what we value. And it brings confidence. And it's the same, whether it's understanding their ADHD brain or anxiety or both. I can't tell you the difference it makes for a kid to go, oh, yeah, actually, this is very normal. Everybody feels this way. My brain's just a little bit trigger happy sometimes, a little bit sensitive to threats. But just being able to say, okay, well, this is what's happening. My alarm's sounding. This is my alarm in my brain. But then being able to go, oh, well, I know that this happens. This is just the way I operate. And objectively, I know I'm not in danger. Helping kids make sense of the way they feel and knowing that we can dampen the response, we can wind it back. And over time, practicing strategies and having kind of a go-to strategy means that if you know what it is, you're easier able to draw on it and put it into practice when the anxiety is building, because we can find it a bit hard to think straight if the anxiety gets too high, dampen it down and still do whatever it was we were planning on doing, even though it's making us feel a little bit anxious. Because anxiety will just close somebody's world right down to literally finding it hard to go to the letterbox. The more we listen to that threat and retreat, we need to make an objective assessment. Is this threat going to cause harm to me? Decide what the answer is, usually no. And then, okay, what can I do about this? I recognize I'm feeling this way. I'm feeling anxious. It makes sense. I'm going to put something into practice, and then I'm going to do the thing that I wanted to do. And the more we do that, the less threatening. We're teaching our brain, hey, this thing isn't so threatening. And so then the anxiety response starts to sort of settle over time. And that's why something that was awfully difficult to begin with, like podcasting, becomes a joy. The brain has learned it's okay. The opposite is true when we avoid. The brain's like, whoo, dodge that bullet. Whoo, that must have been dangerous. We're avoiding that. Good decision. And any parent who's had a child who won't go to school because they feel anxious knows how quickly they'll double down when they've had a little taste of not going, which is probably a topic for another podcast recording. But it's, knowledge is so empowering.
So in ADHD coaching, we talk about this thing called the Tower of Power, right? Which is kind of like the cement slab of a house, and you've got to have your slab right. Otherwise, your ADHD symptoms will be a bit wonky, like they get a bit all over the place and a bit unpredictable. So with things like that are slab, like sleep, diet, exercise, time in nature, these are the like foundational things that we check in with first when we're building executive functions. I'm curious whether it's the same for anxiety. What things make the house wonky for anxiety?
Oh my goodness. I love the Tower of Power. I've not heard that expression before. I always love it. I always love the way people put ideas into pictures that you can create that make a really concrete image of what you're working towards, because I really think it helps with learning. So I love that. And absolutely the foundation that sort of underpin our mental health are the same. I would imagine that they're exactly the same. Exercise. We need to exercise daily for normal brain functioning, not for optimal brain functioning, just for normal brain functioning. We are built to move, and yet our poor kiddos and even us, we spend a huge amount of time sitting, and sitting for lengths of time is linked to anxiety. And so exercise, for the myriad of reasons that it's just a fundamental human need. The endorphins and neurotransmitters, the GABA that is released, dopamine, serotonin, they're aside from all of the physical health benefits. So absolutely sleep. Sleep is a cornerstone. Any one of us know. I mean, I know if I don't get enough sleep, goodness me, watch out. I just know. And like last night I had to reluctantly, because I'm a bit of a night owl. In fact, that's my chronotype. I had to reluctantly kind of head to bed at a decent hour because I knew I was really sort of behind, and it's made the world of difference. So when it comes to our children's sleep, it's very easy for creep to set in, where it just gets that little bit later and later. It's very hard if there are older siblings. Why do they get to go to bed later than me? But we need to think about how old they are, what's the recommended number of hours, and we need to work back from the time they need to wake up in the morning and be really firm in that boundary, knowing the difference that will make for their anxiety. Our amygdala is much more heightened and sensitive when we are not well rested. Nutrition, the gut-brain axis, is a very, very powerful part of our anatomy that influences from our gut to our brain, our mood. And in fact, 95% of our serotonin is produced in the gut. And so the foods that we eat largely dictate how we function and think. And especially when we're talking about executive functioning, not only emotional regulation and nervous system regulation. So aside from that, like you said, time in nature, it's incredibly powerful when it comes to regulating our nervous system. Co-regulation is another huge part of the foundation of anxiety, which needs to be a part of every single day, whereby we as parents are almost training the brains of our children to be able to regulate through the way we are regulated when we are in their company. Very hard when things are winding up. Not necessarily easy. So what have I said? Food, sleep, exercise, nature. I'm sure I'm missing some. And, I guess one of the huge things about our children's lives that is not what it once was is play. Because play, when it comes to anxiety, play gives kids an opportunity to take measured risks. So you think of the kid that wants to climb the tree. They're a bit nervous about it. I was going to climb a tree today. I'd feel a bit nervous too. What's going to happen? Am I going to be able to get down? Am I going to fall? Is the branch going to break? And so this idea that kids can get outside and do things unsupervised if it's safe. We don't need, as adults, to be hands-on and on top of them. We need to, obviously, it goes without saying, we want our kids to be playing safely. So if they're too young to be unsupervised, but when they're old enough, let them out in the garden. Let them get out and do some things and make some decisions and take some risks where they're meant to. And that's how they work out how they feel. They work out what their limits are. They can stretch on those limits a little bit and they can experience a bit of anxiety. They can manage it. They can monitor it. Play is a huge part of life that unfortunately seems to have been very much replaced with a lot of screen time. And every family is the same. Those screens, they are highly addictive. And so I don't know a family that isn't working on trying to put limits in place. So I would say as much play as possible is incredibly powerful developmentally, and also to help kids to work out how to manage their emotions and feel it, cope with it, come through the other side, feel proud. And even if the anxiety pops up outside of a play situation, they've had some experience with it. So that's another huge thing I'd like to add to that.
I love that answer. And yeah, such solid advice there. So if you had to give perhaps to our parents listening at home just a couple of things that they could try at home to maybe support their own anxiety or their family's anxiety, their kids' anxiety, whichever way you want to play it, what are some easy steps that people can do?
All right. So two things. So one is, as a parent, whether it's anxiety or another emotion, another big emotion, I just want for all parents to know that it's okay for our kids to feel whatever comes up for them. We just want them to know they're not alone. We don't have to fix it. We really want to fix it. We want to make it better. We really do. I said to our son, something was going on at school. I knew he wasn't good. He's 15. And for my own anxiety, the next day he came home and like, how's it going? He said, Mum, I really, he's the most gentle soul. He said, I just want to know that I can share with you something's not good, that you know that I've got it, and that I'll ask you if I need help. And I was like, that was just so beautiful. I didn't say that to him, but I just thought, oh, mate, I was asking because I was anxious about it. And so we need to sort of check our own anxiety at the door or deal with it later. Remain, if we can, as regulated as possible, and I'll share a strategy for that in a second. But no, it's really important our kids learn that all feelings are okay, that we're not afraid, they needn't be either, and that we have the capacity to sit with them in their distress so that they are not alone, but we are not trying to make it go away. Now, there's sometimes problems to be solved. If your child comes home and they've been kicked by someone and they're distressed, of course, we're going to comfort them. We're going to validate. We're going to sit with them in that distress. But there is a problem to be solved. There is something to be done. A lot of the time there isn't. A lot of the time we just have to say to ourselves, this is an opportunity. This is the way our kids are going to learn how to manage with life's ups and downs long after they're outside of our nest. So that's the first thing that I would like to say. And that takes practice, and we don't always get it right. And sometimes we'll just problem solve. We'll go into fix-it mode. And I've done that, and I've gone back to one of our kids and said, hey, you know what? I'm sorry that I dived into fix-it mode before. You were sharing something with me that was really upsetting for you. And I really just want you to know that I recognize that probably the best thing I could have done at the time was really be a good listener. And I'll, that's what I'm aiming for, because just letting them know I don't always get it right. The other thing that is incredibly powerful is the breath, because when our brain has detected a threat, we can't tell ourselves we're safe. We can say I'm safe, I'm okay, but our body doesn't really believe us. We kind of have to show our brain that we are safe. And a very powerful way we can do that is through the way we breathe. And a strategy for listeners is to not overbreathe. We don't have to, people will often say, take a deep breath. I advise something different. I'll say, breathe in normally through your nose, lengthen your exhale. So consciously and deliberately focus on your breath. We don't have to sort of overinflate, but breathing in through our nose and then through your nose or through your mouth, breathing out slowly and lengthening that exhale and doing that 3 or 4 times. That is a signal to our brain that there is no threat here, and it will help it dampen our physiology. And so I hope those 2 things are helpful. And if we do a daily breathing practice, then we're more inclined to think to use that strategy when the stakes are higher as well.
They are such helpful tips. I have loved our chat today and having you on this podcast, just sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you so much, Jodi. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Oh, of course. And Sharon, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's it's been a joy to chat with you, and so I appreciate the opportunity. Yes, if you are interested in connecting with me, then you'll find me and everything about the way that I work and how you can connect on my website, which is drjodirichardson.com, and it's DRJODI Richardson. Join me on Instagram. My podcast is called Hello Anxiety, and gorgeous Sharon has been a guest for me. And so, they're the different places that you'll find me in the work that I'm doing.
I'm going to put a link to those in the show notes for people to find those easily as well. Thank you so much for your time today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the ADHD Families Podcast. If you loved it, please share it on your socials. I want this to start a conversation about ADHD. If you want to make this mum do a little happy dance, please leave a review on iTunes. If you would like to know more about what we do, check out thefunctionalfamily.com. I truly hope that you enjoyed this podcast and you use it to create a wonderful, effective, joyful life with your beautiful children.